17 years. No write-ups. 3 letters of commendation. For integrity, for compassion. This morning, I hadn't even finished putting on my scrubs when they handed me the termination letter. They said I had exceeded my clinical authority. All I did was keep the ventilator running so that a newborn could breathe for just a few more hours, while her mother scrambled to come up with the money. They called it a breach, but I knew that was just the excuse. Because lately, I'd started asking questions they didn't want anyone asking. About inflated invoices, about where the payments were really going, and why a young mother had to choose between her child and a 5-digit number on a hospital bill. I didn't know it then. But maybe that was the moment I became something they couldn't control. Outside, a doctor called out chart numbers like it was just another Tuesday. The smell of antiseptic lingered in the hall, same as always. But inside me, for the first time in 17 years, there was nothing. Not anger, not tears, just emptiness. I didn't argue, didn't cry, just stood there, holding my box of personal things, right in the same white hallway where I had worked night shifts through all of my youth. Inside the box, a few faded photos, and a worn-out stuffed animal, a gift from a little girl who once survived thanks to the ventilator I cleaned every single day. When she recovered, she said, "You held my breath for me. Now I want you to have this for holding on to my life." And now, I was the one they decided wasn't worth keeping anymore. I'm a single black mom, no family in this city, no safety net, just these hands. And today, I didn't just lose my job. I lost faith in a profession I once believed was a calling. I thought I'd broken, that I wouldn't come back from this. I planned to stay quiet, disappear. But then, I saw that bill. And I knew it was time for someone to speak. NICU, the neonatal intensive care unit, in a private hospital just outside Columbus, Ohio. Cold white light filtered through the glass windows, falling onto rows of clear plastic incubators. One baby, barely breathing, skin turning blue, wires tangled around her tiny chest. The ventilator beeped, steady and slow, like a countdown. I stood still. In front of me was Brianna, a young mother, her hand clutching a wedding ring that looked too big for her fingers. Her eyes wild with fear. The bill lay on the table, $1,800 to $900, for just 3 days of care. "I don't have insurance," she whispered. "They said if I don't pay $10,000 today, they'll move her to the basic unit." I knew that unit. One outdated ventilator shared between 2 infants. No warming beds, no dedicated nurse. And that baby, she might not make it through the night. "My name is Carmen Wilson, head nurse at the NICU of St. Bartholomew Hospital. 17 years in this job. I've seen pain. Real pain. But I had never felt this helpless or this angry. The ventilator they were charging Brianna for, the ZF-2100, wasn't new. It was an old unit, decommissioned by the city hospital during the COVID-19 outbreak. I knew it. I used to clean it myself. Back then, it cost just under $4,000. Now, the invoice said $12,300, not including a special sanitation fee. I printed the invoice, held the photocopy tight, then walked straight to the supply office. Knocked. David Klein, head of the department, barely glanced at the paper. Smirked. "Nurses should worry about patients, not paperwork." I left without a word, passed down the administrative hallway. Vanessa, head of legal, looked up at me over her thin glasses, then looked away, just as fast. At the end of the hall, a door stood slightly open. Through the gap, I saw him. Charles Harlow, the hospital's director, smiling warmly for a press interview. A pristine white coat, embroidered above the chest pocket, because patients come first. He was the kind of director people liked. Not cold, not distant. He stopped by NICU every holiday, knew our names, sent birthday cards to our families. Last year, he wrote a personal note to my son. "Stay strong, just like your mom." I still remember the day I tripped while pushing a crash cart. He was the first one to help me up. Never pulled rank, never barked orders, just gentle, empathetic. And sometimes, he'd even ask how my son was doing in school. In my eyes back then, and in the eyes of many others at the hospital, he was one of the few still holding on to compassion in a system that had forgotten the word. Behind him stood a man in a security uniform, arms crossed, expression blank. Travis, head of hospital security, brother-in-law to the deputy CFO. Our eyes met, his were cold. Then came that familiar smirk. That evening, I sat in the living room. A dim yellow lamp cast a soft glow on an old photo, Me and my son, back when he was still in elementary school. He's 16 now, and he hates medicine. Healthcare's just profit off the poor now, he said once. I don't want to be part of that. I clenched the invoice. If that baby girl dies because her mother couldn't pay, then it won't just be on them. It'll be on me too, if I stay quiet. I opened the old procurement app on my phone. Back when staffing was short, they had me help input orders. Strangely, my login still worked. I scrolled through the database. Purchase order, BRX 118. Vendor, Blue Rock Medical Supply. Item, ZF 2100 ventilator. Price, $12,300. Approved by David Klein. Financial authorization, Mark Lively, Deputy CFO. At the bottom, a note, additional sanitation charge, per Eclipse 9 directive. My hands trembled. Eclipse 9, I'd never heard of it, but the name sat there like a sealed command, absolute. I checked a few more entries, all from Blue Rock, all overpriced, and under several of them, a recurring line, urgent request, executive level. No names, no signatures, just a code and a pattern no one was supposed to see. I printed the PDF, sent it to Daniel Ruiz, our Deputy Director of Internal Affairs. The only person I'd ever seen refuse staff cuts because, in his words, medical ethics aren't negotiable. Before sunrise, an envelope slid under my door. No name, no return address. Inside, a dialysis invoice, $9,600 per session. At the bottom, scribbled in unsteady handwriting, we couldn't afford the treatment. My mother didn't make it. If you understand, please don't stay silent like I did. I looked out the window. The night was still thick, but somewhere out there, someone else was awake and refusing to stay quiet. What I found in that system wasn't just a number that didn't add up. It was a doorway into something I never imagined I'd step into. I didn't sleep. The numbers from Brianna's invoice kept looping in my head, like a distress signal jammed on repeat. I'm not an investigator, but during a staffing shortage, I used to help input procurement data into the hospital's supply system. The old app was still on my phone. I opened it. No one had revoked my access. I searched for the order, BRX 118. Supplier, Blue Rock Medical Supply. Ventilator model ZF 2100. Price, $12,300. I knew that machine. The public hospital sold it off for $4,000 just before COVID hit, and now somehow it was back, resold through Blue Rock at triple the cost. Approval signature, David Klein, Head of Supplies. Finance authorization, Mark Lively, Deputy Director. Beneath it, a single line of text, special sterilization surcharge, per Eclipse 9 directive. I printed the file, sent it to Daniel Ruiz. He didn't reply, but I saw the read receipt. And that was enough. The next morning, I went back to the hospital to pack up my things. Just as I reached the elevator, Travis, Head of Security, stepped in front of me. Brother-in-law to the Deputy Director of Finance, and always somehow exactly where no one had asked him to be. I hear you've been poking around in things outside your scope. His voice was flat, eyes unblinking, a threat colder than the termination letter. That evening, I got a call from Tanya, former supply room staff. She once clashed with the department head in a closed-door meeting, then quietly resigned. I kept an email that got scrubbed from the server. I'll send it to you, on a private line. The file landed a few minutes later. Subject line, Blue Rock Internal, Priority Clearance. Sender, Dr. Kennedy. Recipient, Deputy Director of Finance, Mark Lively. It read, Margaret needs to be protected. Blue Rock is critical to NICU funding. My blood froze, Margaret. Mark Lively's wife. Blue Rock, the so-called medical supplier, was beginning to look more and more like a family business. Not long after, Daniel called back. His voice was low, measured. I can't confirm anything over the phone, but Lively once opposed the Blue Rock contract, before he was reassigned to finance. I reopened the internal system, pulled every NICU-related purchase order from the past 18 months, but the system auto-locked after 10 minutes. I only managed to save the last 3. Still, it was enough. Enough to spot a pattern. Inflated prices, every supply from Blue Rock. I texted Tanya. Any way to contact an investigative journalist? The sooner the better. An hour later, my phone rang. Lydia, she'd once exposed a massive insurance fraud scheme. I don't need a story, she said. I need evidence. Do you have it? I do. Then be ready. Monday morning, I opened my locker in the NICU break room. A brown envelope lay quietly inside. No sender, no note. Inside were 3 sheets of paper. A dialysis invoice, hours faked, billing inflated. A patient record, treatment discontinued due to lack of funds, a list of cancer meds, imported through an unregistered third party. In the corner, scribbled in blue ink, "You're not the first to see it, but maybe you'll be the first who doesn't look away." That night, I sat at the kitchen table, pouring a cup of cold tea. Across from me, my son scrolled his phone in silence. "You're on the med forums now. Someone posted your picture. They called you a whistleblower." I didn't respond. But one of them said, "If you're brave enough to go against the director, there's probably a reason." I opened my laptop, clicked open the folder labeled Truth, created an anonymous inbox, encrypted every file using the software Daniel once sent me, set it to auto-send, 8 a.m., sharp, to Lydia. I wasn't hoping for headlines, or redemption, or to be called brave. All I wanted was for the truth to live one more day. I didn't know if the files I just sent would reach the right hands. But I did know this: if I stayed silent now, every truth buried before would stay buried for good. And I couldn't let that happen. 8 a.m., Monday. I stood in front of the mirror, motionless. Cold light from the bathroom bulb hit my bloodshot eyes, the kind you get when sleep won't come, no matter how long the night is. The inbox had sent itself. Seconds later, Lydia's message lit up my screen. "It's live." I clicked the link. The headline gripped my lungs like a fist. "Inflated equipment costs, unregulated cancer drugs. Who's really running St. Bartholomew Hospital?" Below it, scanned invoices, pricing charts, and one handwritten note, "Approved per Eclipse 9." For the first time, Margaret Lively's name was publicly linked to Blue Rock. And the code word, Eclipse 9, a secret only the hospital's highest ranks had whispered behind closed doors, was now screaming across the front page. Less than 30 minutes later, Daniel texted, "The Department of Health is sending inspectors, today." But I didn't get to wait. I was summoned to HR. Vanessa, the hospital's legal counsel, was already there, waiting in a room too bright for what was coming. Light spilled over a dying plant and a folder spilling papers like loose leaves. "You shared internal documents. The hospital is considering legal action." I met her eyes, calm, steady. "Then you should probably call the director, because after today, the one needing a lawyer might not be me." On my way down to the lobby, Travis, the head of security, stepped in front of me again. "Orders from above, bag check, and you're to be followed." His eyes were cold steel, but I didn't flinch. He wasn't a threat. He was a shadow with teeth, sent to rattle cages. But the truth? The real files had been sent 3 days ago. By noon, it hit like a storm. On TV, nurse accuses hospital of using unregulated drugs, dialysis costs inflated by 300%. Online, the woman who stood up to an entire hospital board, hero or saboteur. Then came the leaked video, chopped audio, stitched edits, making it look like I was mocking my own colleagues. That evening, my son came home, head down, phone gripped tight. "They put your name on the whiteboard, Mom. Called you a traitor." I held him close. "I'm not fighting the hospital. I'm refusing to let patients be treated like invoices." Then Lydia messaged again. "Source from finance confirms every inflated transaction ran through Mark Lively, but always stamped with the same line. Urgent. Approved by Eclipse 9. Eclipse 9, a name never printed, a signature never seen, but nothing moved without their silent nod. And I didn't need another whisper to know. We weren't chasing shadows anymore. We were staring straight into one. That evening, I sat with Daniel in his law office. Whiteboards lined the walls, covered in names, arrows, invoices, internal codes. He looked at me. "Carmen Reynolds, VP of Medical Operations, filed a report about Blue Rock 9 months ago. They kicked him off the advisory board right after." I froze. Reynolds. He was the only one on the executive floor who ever looked me in the eye without trying to manage me. The only one who ever asked, "You okay?" after a 12-hour NICU shift. Near midnight, a message popped up. No name. Just a line: "If you want the truth about Cytovine RX, meet me. Cafe number 7, 17th Street, tomorrow, 9 a.m. I looked across the room, at my son asleep on the couch, phone still in his hand, soft breath rising, falling. And I knew tomorrow wasn't about gathering evidence anymore. It was stepping into the very heart of the maze, where light stops being light and starts turning into something else. I didn't know who'd be waiting at that cafe. I just knew. Once I walked through that door, there'd be no walking back. 9 a.m. Cafe number 7, corner of 17th Street, Soft light spilled through the window, streaking across the old wooden table. Spoons clinked quietly against ceramic. A slow jazz tune played from an old radio by the counter. At the far corner sat a young man in a faded jacket, eyes fixed on his laptop. He looked up. Carmen? His name was Elijah. His mother had died from complications after receiving Cytovine RX, a cancer drug sourced through Blue Rock. Origin? Unknown. Elijah had once worked in health data analytics, specializing in anomaly detection. And one night, he noticed the numbers didn't add up. Cancer mortality at St. Bartholomew tripled, he said, right after Cytovine RX started coming in. He turned the laptop toward me. Line graphs, procurement codes, heat maps of internal purchases. Among them, hundreds of encrypted logs. All these entries, Elijah said, were created using restricted access. The one who authorized it was Travis, the man behind the door, brother-in-law of the hospital's finance VP, the same man who'd ordered the March security logs erased. I didn't flinch, but my spine felt cold. We headed straight back to Daniel's office. The relationship map on his wall was now a spider's web. Margaret Lively, wife of the finance VP. Mark Lively, finance VP. David Klein, head of procurement. Travis, chief of security. Quentin Voss, signed in place of Lansing. Elijah, system analyst. Then Tanya walked in. She carried a thick envelope, copies of device contracts funneled through a shell company, owned by Margaret's cousin. The final sign-off? Eclipse 9, exception granted. That afternoon, Brianna showed up, a folder clutched tightly in her arms. My father used to get dialysis here. They told us the machines were new. That's why the price went up, but I kept the old invoices. She laid them out on the table. Elijah scanned the device codes. Match. Same machine, new casing, new serial, rebranded as Z-Tech Advance. But the core inside was an old model previously flagged for failure in a hospital in Texas. Daniel stood up, his face set. This goes to the state medical board and to the press. I nodded. Elijah plugged in his external drive. Beep. The folder opened. Inside, a recorded conversation. Female voice. Mark doesn't make the final call. Eclipse 9 does. Male voice. What about Reynolds? He's being let go. Just make sure his name doesn't show up on this month's board minutes. I turned to Daniel. He gave a small nod. Brianna whispered, we just hit the core of the system. And I said quietly, and the mask is about to fall. But when it did, we realized what lay behind it wasn't just a face. It was a machine that had long since learned how to protect itself. 3 days after the recording went public, Brianna received an anonymous email. The sender's address? Already deleted from the system. Attached, an internal document confirming that Travis had bypassed procurement protocol to manually approve drug shipments. He wasn't even part of the supply team. Brianna sent it to Lydia immediately. Within an hour, Lydia called back. She'd tracked down a former accounting staffer, someone who once processed payments to Blue Rock. The expenses were always broken into smaller chunks, coded, buried in unrelated departments, but they all carried one identical tag, Eclipse 9 Emergency Override. That night, the headline exploded across the homepage. A shadow figure controls all medical decisions. Who is Eclipse 9? By morning, the Ohio Department of Health had called an emergency meeting. The National Health Insurance Board froze all claims coming from St. Bartholomew, CNN, ABC, NPR. Every major outlet picked it up. The hashtag StopEclipse9 surpassed 5 million shares in just under 48 hours. Suddenly, I became the face of it all. But not the way you might think. She's just a nurse, one conservative commentator scoffed. Who is she to accuse an entire system of corruption? Is this some coordinated smear campaign against leadership? A video surfaced, clipped, edited, twisted. It showed me mid-sentence, looking cold and dismissive, as if mocking fellow nurses. That evening, my son came home, phone in hand, eyes red. They put your name on the whiteboard, Mom, under traitor. They said, you're the reason the hospital lost funding. I didn't say much, just held him close. Then whispered, I'm not fighting the hospital. I'm fighting the idea that patients can be reduced to invoices. That afternoon, I walked up to the hospital gates, this time wearing a different badge. Clear Care Watch. Reporters swarmed in. Are you doing this for the patients or for personal attention? I looked straight into the camera. Ask the mothers who buried their children because of counterfeit meds. Inside, the hospital board was holding a closed-door meeting. Daniel's source confirmed. David Ruiz, the former director of internal affairs, had been nominated for interim oversight. At the same time, Travis was summoned by the State Health Investigation Bureau. Elijah pulled additional logs, proving Travis had manually deleted surveillance footage and tampered with medical equipment records. Tanya sent over another procurement contract, this time for heat sensors. The approval tag? ZCRX, fast-tracked by Eclipse 9. That night I posted on ClearCare Watch, we think of a syringe as something that can save a life, but one wrong click can kill hundreds. The post went viral. Over 2 million shares in just a few hours, and for the first time, people weren't asking who I was. They were asking, who is Eclipse 9? And then a name surfaced. One we never expected. The moment it appeared, everyone in the war room went silent. Because if it was true, then everything we believed up until now was a lie. 3 days after the ClearCare Watch conference, an anonymous email arrived at Daniel's law office. Attached was a screenshot, a system entry confirming the import of Cytovine RX, the cancer drug now under investigation. The timestamp matched the very first shipment from Blue Rock. But what shook us was the name tied to the system login. Robert Lansing. Daniel frowned. Lansing fought against Blue Rock contracts. This doesn't make sense. I nodded. Too clean? Too perfectly timed. Like someone had just set up a fall guy. Elijah immediately ran a server-side trace. One log entry had been overwritten, right at the approval timestamp. But Lansing? He'd been in a state health meeting at that exact moment. No way he was even near the server room. Elijah tapped into the cloud backup, ran a recovery algorithm. The result? The approval didn't come from Lansing. It came from an internal device, registered to Travis. Daniel widened the scope. The financial approval wasn't Lansing either. It was Quentin Voss. Tanya chimed in. Travis was placed as head of security by Harlow himself, and he was given full access to the digital archive. Brianna came in holding a folder, a copy of a grant presentation from 2 years ago. The presenter, Margaret Lively. Topic: streamlining the chronic medication supply chain. Final approval? Eclipse 9 executive override. Daniel looked at me. If Lansing were Eclipse 9, why is every document so carefully avoiding naming him? I didn't answer. I just remembered Harlow, the way he watched from the corner during that first press conference. Calm, still, unshaken, not scared, not scrambling. Just observing a chessboard he had probably set up 5 moves ago. Elijah uncovered a hidden line of code in the system, ECL9 gate, a backdoor that bypassed all levels of approval. The creator? Not listed. But access to create something like this could only come from the very top. No deputy director had that kind of authority. I clenched my fists. Once again, it pointed to Travis. But Travis didn't have the technical chops. Not even close. There had to be someone behind him. Someone with real power, real precision, and the kind of mind that stays cold when others run hot. We headed back to the hospital, this time with 2 attorneys and an independent journalist. Officially, a site visit for a pending federal investigation. In the equipment storage room, Elijah connected his extraction device. The screen blinked. Power surge log deleted manually. I exhaled. Softly. They knew we were coming, and they made sure we'd find nothing. Elijah nodded. I'll recover it. No one gets to erase the truth. At that exact moment, Daniel received an email from Robert Lansing. Just one line. Meet me. I don't have much time left. The address, a nursing home on the outskirts of Columbus. I went alone, room 214. Dim light, the ceiling fan hummed, the air smelled of disinfectant and old wood. Silence filled every corner. Lansing sat in a wheelchair by the window. His voice was hoarse. I'm not Eclipse 9, but someone had to take the fall. He handed me an envelope, inside a signed contract by Margaret Lively and a flash drive. Back at Daniel's office, Elijah loaded the file. The recording began. A woman's voice. You just play the moral figure. I'll handle the rest. Then Harlow, good, just make sure no one ever links it back to Eclipse 9. Elijah's hand trembled. Tanya broke into silent tears. I whispered, now we know who ran the shadow. By late afternoon, the recording had been sent to the State Department of Health and 2 national news networks. On CNN, Hospital Director Charles Harlow, suspected to be Eclipse 9. Official investigation underway. Footage rolled. Harlow stepping out of a board meeting, surrounded by reporters. He spoke calmly. I've dedicated my life to this hospital. But then, the handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists. a chilling sound, and his leather briefcase slipped from his hand and hit the tile floor. The last shadow had a face now, but when the darkness lifted, what remained wasn't light. It was the wreckage of truths buried for far too long. And now, one by one, they would have to face it. 3 days after Charles Harlow's arrest, the federal court froze all personal accounts held by him and Margaret Lively. Over 200 suspicious transactions were flagged. 3 criminal cases opened, 9 felony charges, medical contract manipulation, insurance fraud, financial misconduct, witness intimidation, destruction of federal evidence. At the first hearing, Dr. Kennedy took the stand, eyes sunken, voice shaking. I was warned, but I stayed quiet, and that silence killed people. Margaret, former wife of the deputy director, walked out of a live interview the moment Blue Rock contracts were mentioned. A week later, she announced her withdrawal from all business operations, citing personal reasons. And one by one, those once called irrelevant began to speak. Quentin Voss, director of finance. I signed the approvals under pressure from Eclipse 9. I never knew who they really were, only that disobeying meant losing my job. Peter Doan, head of procurement. I took kickbacks from Blue Rock. Didn't know the equipment was substandard, but I stayed silent. Travis, head of security, charged with destroying evidence and unauthorized access to federal medical databases. He said nothing in court. Just looked at me, not with defiance, but with empty eyes. For the first time, he had no smirk left to give. Mark Lively, deputy director of finance, suspended, then agreed to cooperate. He turned over more than 50 internal emails revealing Eclipse 9's hand behind the scenes, then quietly submitted his resignation and left healthcare finance for good. Vanessa, head of legal, she sat in front of the internal board, silent for what felt like hours, then finally said, I followed orders, but now I see Carmen was right. 1 week later, St. Bartholomew Hospital held a special press conference. David Ruiz, former deputy director of internal affairs, was officially appointed as the new hospital director. He stood before a room full of reporters and grieving families. We will rebuild this hospital, not with funding, but with trust. Then he turned to me, Carmen Wilson, the first to speak up. Not just the hands that kept patients alive, but the voice that fought for justice on behalf of thousands of families. It would be our honor to welcome her back, this time as our Director of Ethics and Health Equity. I walked to the podium. In my hand was a letter from a mother who had lost her child to Cytovine RX. Because of you, it read, I know my son didn't die in vain. 3 months later, at a small park near the new Clear Care Watch headquarters, I stood before a crowd of more than 500 families. Families who used to stay silent, now standing shoulder to shoulder, ready to be heard. We started as a whisper, I said. Now, we are a movement. Behind me stood Daniel, now a national investigator for healthcare justice. Elijah, the one who recovered every line of truth. Tanya, Brianna, people once dismissed, now the backbone of a new system built on transparency, courage, and care. 2 years later, the Medical Billing Transparency Act passed in 12 states. Clear Care Watch had helped over 3,000 families. More than 50 hospitals began auditing their supply chains and financial records, voluntarily. That morning, I unlocked the front door of our office. Sunlight spilled across the glass panels. A mother pushed a stroller past the entrance. In her hand, a Clear Care Watch flyer. Under the light, a faded line of chalk still clung to the old brick wall. Speak so the silence ends. The flyer fluttered in the breeze, and I knew this journey was never just mine. But deep down, one question still lingered. Can a hospital once run in the shadows ever truly begin again? In the light? 1 year after the final hearing, I returned to St. Bartholomew Hospital. The bold red slogan on the wall was gone. In its place, a small whiteboard with a quiet message. We begin again, with honesty. The NICU hallway felt still. The light was softer now. A young nurse looked up and greeted me, eyes full of quiet trust. She had been a first-year intern the day I left, watching me walk out without a word. I don't work here every day anymore, but I come back to teach the first class on ethics and equity in patient care. I placed a small wooden box on the lectern. Inside was the old stuffed animal. A student asked, "You've kept it all these years. Why?" I said, "Because it wasn't just a gift from a child we saved. It was a reminder That if I don't hold the line on ethics, no one will be there to hold the life of a child like her. Downstairs, a new patient advocacy room had just opened. At the reception desk sat a printed packet, a guide to reading medical bills, alongside a full price list for every service offered. In the corner, a young mother filled out a grievance form, her hands steady, her chin held high. Behind her, the Clear Care Watch logo stood silent and strong. A few months later, a major hospital in Texas reached out. "We want to learn from your model," they said, "and we believe it should start with a class on ethics." I smiled. Not because I mattered, but because I knew trust had begun to travel. During an interview with PBS, the host asked me, "Carmen, if you could go back to the day you were fired, would you do anything differently?" I paused for a few seconds, then answered softly, "I'd still clean that ventilator. And I'd still choose the child, even if the cost was everything." Later that night, my son called from med school. "Mom, they just approved my thesis topic," I asked. "What'd you choose?" He replied, "How silence kills and how one single mom broke it." I turned toward the window. Outside, the moonlight spilled across the old brick wall. The chalk words still faintly visible, "Speak so the silence ends." I smiled. Maybe I never really left. You made it all the way here, which means Carmen's story and the shadows inside that hospital touched something real in you. Was there a moment that made you hold your breath? A detail that caught you off guard? And tell us honestly, when did you first suspect who Eclipse 9 really was? Did you ever think Charles Harlow might have been a good man? And what about Lansing? Maybe he was just another person who stayed silent, like so many of us once did. Share your thoughts in the comments. Which character stayed with you the most? Where in the world are you watching from? And have you ever witnessed something like this in a system you once trusted? If you believe this story deserves to be heard, hit subscribe and share it with someone who would understand. Not to make this channel popular, but so people like Carmen never have to feel alone again. Thank you for walking with us all the way to the end. This is Cozy Heart Stories, where every story becomes a voice for those who were once told to stay silent.